everyone. Thank you for attending our two-part program today. My name is Melissa Hafaf, and I'm the program director for the Gender Plus Justice Initiative. We are a cross-campus effort whose mission is to support and nurture research and projects related to intersectional gender justice. Feel free to visit our website and join our mailing list to find out about our future events. And we are also always happy to collaborate on programs and projects. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to get in touch with us. Today, the Gender Plus Justice Initiative is delighted to present a screening and conversation about the history of voting rights, and particularly the 19th Amendment, and take a look at its undeniable racist roots and legacy. We will start with a 20-minute screening of Bit of Flower, a short play written by Jennifer Natalie Fink and directed by Lawrence Carlyle III and Ryan Pagels, which was part of the Burning Coal Theater's 19th Amendment Project, a collection of short plays written by some of the most accomplished women and non-binary playwrights, focusing on the passage of the 19th Amendment 100 years ago and its ongoing impact. We would like to thank the Gilbert Theater and the Burning Coal Theater Company, without whom this screening could not have been possible. Our guests for the post-screening conversations are Professor Fink, the author of the play we are about to watch, and who is also an English professor at Georgetown University, Marcia Chatlin, a professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University, and Victoria Norris, a professor at the law school at the Georgetown University Law Center. We are ready for the screening. Thank you.
Miss Adams, so good of you to receive me. I'm Ida Wells Barnett.
Welcome to Hull House, Miss Wells. Please excuse the mess. I had a contingent of indigent ladies and their children here this afternoon, and I haven't had time to tidy.
That's quite all right.
A little Polish boy drew this. His grandmother back in the old country.
Darling. And it is impressive. Most impressive, your Hull House. But, Miss Adams, I was hoping you would use your impressive voice to speak out against lynching. As I'm sure you're well aware, there is a veritable plague of lynchings, a veritable epidemic against the colored man in the South.
Miss Wells, you don't have to convince me. I am 100% opposed to this most vile practice. 100%.
Please call me Ida, and I'm so glad you understand, because there are many, even north of the Mason-Dixon, that cannot believe the numbers, do not believe the numbers. The violence, the crisis the Negro family is enduring.
I understand. You know, Miss Wells, it is most auspicious you're here today.
Indeed,
I'm launching my new column in The Independent, and I was just telling Sally that I am searching for a subject with which to grip the attention of my gentlemen and gentle lady readers alike. How the Negroes suffer. Lynching. What better topic with which to commence my journalistic endeavors?
Indeed, I was hoping...
Yes, I will write my debut column on this very topic. We cannot let mob rule overrun the South. Miss Wells, you can tell your colored club ladies to look for my column decrying the horrors of lynching. In my very first column. As the first woman to have her own column. In The Independent. Truly, Miss Wells, I am so glad that you came and brought this to my attention.
And truly, I am grateful.
Oh, no, it is my pleasure and my duty. Now, on to other, more pleasant matters. Do you have a garden, Miss Wells?
I'm afraid I do not, but we do have a small backyard that the boys have turned into a baseball diamond.
Miss Smith brought me arugula from her trip to Venice. It flowers this gorgeous winter white, but its leaves, though edible, are quite bitter. Taste!
Miss Adams, I'm so terribly sorry.
Bitter and beautiful.
Such is the nature of beauty, Miss Smithy always says. Can I offer you tea?
Oh, thank you kindly, but I took my tea at home. My six are all home sick from school this week, so we had to hold my ladies' club meeting in my drawing room. Can you imagine? My husband, he's a lawyer, and 6 sick children and 2 club ladies. You're not married, Miss Adams?
My goodness. No, it's just myself and Miss Smith here, and of course Sally always tending to our needs, but I like to think of all the needy children of the world as my own.
Well, I wouldn't mind sending 2 of mine over to you then. But truly, Miss Adams, a clear statement against lynching at this moment would not just be a beacon of light. It would save lives, the same lives that you're helping to attain food, housing, and work. And you would help advance the cause of racial uplift. For when they lynch one colored man, they silence 100 more.
I couldn't agree more. It's a shame, a stain, a great unchristianness. Now, Miss Wells, I have a favor to ask of you. I have begun to organize to get the vote for women. Women's suffrage. In the new century, we must at last be enfranchised. Would you inspire your colored club ladies to join me in advocating for all women's suffrage here in Illinois?
Absolutely. My women understand that without the vote, we are at a double disadvantage. Our color and our sex conspire to leave us at the mercy of the white man's whims. So we know that
Absolutely. I'm so sorry, but I have some ladies from the Hatmakers Union coming in to meet me now. They too are rising to the cause of women's suffrage. But it was so lovely to meet you. I am so glad to know the renowned Miss Wells, leader of the Colored Women's March to the Ballot Box.
And thank you kindly for your time, Miss Adams, and for your solemn commitment to use your column in The Independent to decry the epidemic of lynching.
A shame, a great sin, a terrible unchristianness.
Indeed, the murder of innocent men for the crime of owning property is certainly most unchristian.
I have to meet with the hat ladies now, but you can look forward to my column decrying the horrors of lynching. Shame!
Shame!
Stain!
Stain!
Unchristian!
Unchristian!
Thank you. And Happy New Year to you. I'll see myself out then.
Independent Magazine. January 1901. Against lynching. Respect for law. To those who say that most of these hideous and terrorizing acts of lynching have been committed in the name of chivalry in order to make the lives and honor of women safe, perhaps it is women themselves who can best reply that bloodshed and arson and ungoverned anger have never yet controlled sex. Lust. Brutality begets brutality, and proceeding on the theory that the Negro is undeveloped and therefore must be treated in this primitive fashion is to forget that the immature pay little attention to statements, but quickly imitate what they see. We would send this message to our fellow citizens of the South who are once more trying to suppress vice by violence, that the bestial in man, that which leads him to pillage and rape, can never be controlled by public cruelty and dramatic punishment. Good morning, Miss Wells. Have my girls see you in?
And good morning to you,
Miss Adams will be with you presently. May I get you some refreshment?
If you have tea, I wouldn't mind tea, ma'am. Black.
Yes, Miss Wells.
It's Mrs. Wells Barnett, actually.
Miss Wells, I'm so delighted that you came to see me. What a treat to get to wish you a most happy new year in person. Has my girl seen to your needs?
My needs? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Miss Wells, please call me Jane.
Yes, Miss Adams. Jane.
Here you are, Miss Wells.
Thank you, Sally. She's a delight. I don't know what I would do without her.
Indeed.
And how are your children? Little Charles must be in long pants by now.
Yes, and growing like a beanstalk. But, Miss Adams, I'm afraid I've come not merely to take tea and exchange pleasantries.
Of course. Your settlement house. You know you have my support. Colored women are the backbone of settlement houses across the nation. I shall have Miss Smith write a check for $50 towards the project.
Thank you. I do appreciate your generosity, as do my ladies, but I shall be blunt. It's this I've come to talk to you about. Respect for law.
I hope you're pleased. I have taken the strongest possible stand here.
Indeed, I think you may...
Women who are protected by violence are protected as the women of a savage and must still be considered the property of man. Brutality begets brutality. I quite like that one, don't you? Never underestimate the power of sibilance. And taking the proposition that the Negro is undeveloped and must be treated in this primitive fashion is to forget that the immature take little attention of statements but quickly imitate what they see.
But you imply our men are mere children. Miss Adams, I'm afraid your defense of law is really a defense of lynching and an offense to the Negro man and woman.
But I say very clearly, brutality begets brutality. Any attempt to allay and control lust by scenes, I mean lynching, of course, is as ignorant as it is futile and childish. I could not be clearer in my indictment of this deplorable and most lawless practice.
With all due respect, Miss Adams, though I am grateful for your efforts to decry lynching, nowhere do you challenge the lie. The tragic and vicious lie that Negroes are more prone to the most depraved criminality than white men. In fact, you reinforce it.
Lynching is as ignorant as it is futile and childish.
Lynching is neither futile nor childish. It is a devious and intentional punishment. Punishment not for the colored man's criminality, but for his ambition.
But Miss Wells,
The Negro swings not because he covets the white man's wife, but his farm, his shop, his store.
Miss Wells, men are men. Men everywhere of every hue are born in sin and die in sin. Men!
It is not the white man who is lynched. It is the colored man. It is not the white man who fears to walk the streets after dark, who knows that if he were to own a farm, a shop, a shed for that matter, that he might at any minute be burned alive and dragged through the street.
And I deplore such barbaric...
Might swing from the magnolia tree while his wife and children cry in horror and his white neighbors laugh. Laugh! It is not for their immoral behavior that they swing from the white man's rope, that we swing.
I am well aware that there are gross injustices committed against colored men in the South. But you cannot deny that they are men, and prone to the same
Oh, spare me
injustices.
your eloquence, Miss Adams. You like to speak with such pageantry and drama. Brutality begets brutality. Such sibilance. But I am here to tell you the inelegant truth. The Negro man and woman who dares to own their own business, to go to college, to claim the ballot box for themselves, are threatened with the rope.
And in my
And
article,
it is not an empty threat, Miss Adams. Hundreds, if not thousands, have been lynched, dragged from their homes in the dead of night, burned alive, castrated, hung for the merriment of whites. For what crime?
but there is
No crime. For the crime of desiring the right to work, to have, to own, that you do without a second thought.
Well, I certainly take your point.
Do you know why I had to leave Tennessee? They threatened to lynch me, Miss Adams. In the dead of night, with only one trunk, I left my home, my dead mother's linens, my life. Oh, they were so bold as to send me a telegram. We have the rope ready, Miss Wells.
It is a terrible...
We have the rope ready.
Miss Adams,
Miss Wells, please. I am aware that there are incidents of injustice against colored men in the South, but all men are distempered by drink, all men. And our greatest opportunity to end the scourge of drink and drunkenness, which we both know leads to the greatest cruelties against the female and her household, is to extend the vote to women. Only through women's suffrage will temperance ever be achieved, and
Will temperance protect my uncle, lynched for the crime of opening a feed store in Mobile, Alabama? Will temperance protect his wife, who teaches Sunday school every Sunday, from seeing her husband burned alive and dragged through the streets?
Do you know who built this settlement house? Who funds my good works? I have no husband, Mrs. Barnett. The rich men of this city laughed at me when I wanted to open a settlement house. Oh, a settlement house, Miss Adams. Are you going to import it from London like fine-bone china? A rough house for the dirty Italians, the unwashed Irish, the ugly Jews. Stick to knitting bonnets. Leave the business of poverty to us. They laughed in my face.
Such disrespect.
But I convinced their wives that it was what Christian charity demands, the duty of the rich to the poor. And it is now those same wives that we must convince, Miss Wells. The Southern wives, the benighted wives of the Confederacy, who can in turn convince their husbands that their womanly virtue is at stake. The hand that rocks the cradle will win the ballot box and dry the gin bottle, and thus preserve our womanly virtue, all women's virtue.
Your virtue is my husband's ruin, my uncle's ruin. The white Southern woman is no more endangered by the colored man than your maid is by me. The lynched men are not rapists, not drunkards endangering the white Southern misses. It is our men, my men, the men of this very settlement house who are in danger, whose lives
Do you
are...
not think the drink a terrible threat to all womanhood? It is drink that distempers and ruins men, ruins and rapes us. United in womanly terror.
It is lynching that ruins us. Must women's suffrage be tethered to temperance and the false flag of drunken rapaciousness waved against my men? Have you no other rationale for the vote?
Such questions are best left to your club women to debate round a roaring fire on a windy afternoon, Miss Wells. I know how to get the vote. For you, for me, and for all women. Without the Southern wives, we will never get the ear of their husbands who decide our fates, our daughters' fates.
My daughters? My daughters need their daddy. Need fathers to swing golf clubs, baseball bats, briefcases. Need never see their fathers swing from a tree. Miss Adams, have you ever lived in the South? Ever seen the poverty colored people endure there? Whole towns that would not serve a Negro a cup of tea, where no business is owned by a Negro, where no Negro dare walk the streets after dark for fear of the rope.
I am aware, Miss Wells, and it is such poverty that breeds drink, that breeds
the rape of white women? Do you dare say it to me?
Men are men, are born, bred, and burnished in sin. Men!
My husband is no rapist.
I am sure that is true, Miss Wells. I am sure that the scourge of drink and drunkenness has not spilled onto him. We are united in our desire for women's suffrage, are we not? We are united in our desire for freedom from sin and poverty. I have burnished bright the path for all men and women who wish dignity, chastity, and Christ's love. My record speaks more loudly than my fading voice. I can say no more.
Then I will say it. I will write, sing, and preach it. Prove that there is no dark tide sweeping over the sweet southern peaches.
We are united, Miss Wells, though you do not seem to know it.
Yet you demand the blood of the colored man be spilled for the white woman. The blood of my husband, my son.
I say no such
very
thing.
same young colored boys who populate this settlement house. What kind of suffrage is this? I leave you to ponder that question. Good day, Miss Adams. Oh, do not rise. I will let myself out. Lynching and the excuse for it. May 16, 1901, The Independent. The distinguished writer says, "Let us assume that the Southern citizens who take part in and abet the lynching of Negroes honestly believe that this is the only method of dealing with a certain class of crimes. It is this assumption, this absolutely unwarrantable assumption, that vitiates every suggestion which it inspires Miss Adams to make. The excuses of lynchers and the specious pleas of their apologists should be considered in the light of the record, which they invariably misrepresent or ignore. This table tells its own story. The Negro men who are lynched are not rapists. The Christian and moral forces of the nation should insist that misrepresentation should have no place in the discussion of this all-important question, that the figures of the lynching record should be allowed to plead trumpet-tongued in defense of the slandered dead."
All right, we are back. Um, Whoops, sorry. Thank you very much, Professor Fink, for this brilliant play, which allows us today to have this conversation. Um, I would like to tell the audience, please ask your questions in the chat box. If you have any questions for our panelists today, I would first proceed by introducing our speakers today, and then open up the conversation with a couple of questions, sorry. First, we have Jennifer Natalia Fink, who is the author of 6 critically acclaimed books. She has won numerous awards, including the Catherine Doctorow Innovative Fiction Prize for Bopal Dance and the Dana Award for the Mikvah Queen. She's a professor at Georgetown University and the director of the Disability Studies program. Professor Fink teaches experimental writing, disability studies, performance studies, and queer studies. We also have Dr. Marcia Chatlin, who is a historian and professor at Georgetown University, specializing in African American history, life, and culture. She's the author of Franchise, which investigates the relationship that grew between McDonald's and Black communities across America following the Civil Rights Movement. And she also published Southside Girls, Growing Up in the Great Migration in 2015. And finally, last but not least, Professor Victoria Norris, who is one of the nation's leading scholars on statutory interpretation, Congress, and the separations of power. She's also the director of the Georgetown Law School's First Center on Congressional Studies. She's the author of several books, including Misreading Law, Misreading Democracy, published in 2016, In Reckless Hands, published in 2008, which is the story of Skinner versus Oklahoma and American eugenics. And she also wrote Equal, Women Reshape American Law, which tells the story of her role in the fight for the Original Violence Against Women Act. Now I will start with asking a couple of questions to our playwright, Jennifer Natalia Fink. And I have 2 questions for you to open up. First, if you could give us a background about how this play came to be. As I mentioned earlier, it was part of a larger project organized by the Burning Coal Theater Company in North Carolina. So if you could give us a little bit of a background, tell us about the research and the writing process, as well as the format, why such a short play? And second, what were your intentions and goals when putting these 2 pivotal figures in dialogue? And what does it mean to you as a non-Black feminist writer writing about race and the racial tensions in the suffrage movement?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Melissa and the Gender and Justice Initiative. And thank you, Marcia and Victoria, for joining with your expertise today. I'm very much not a lawyer or an historian, as you can probably tell from my play. Bitter Flower has sort of a bitter and floral history, one might say. It actually emerged from a performance work called Underbelly that the artist Julie Lafine, who I often collaborate with, and I devised and performed for another sort of memorializing of the 19th Amendment at the College Art and Art History Association 2020 meeting in February, before COVID, in Chicago on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And our piece, I'm gonna share my screen so you can see some images from it. Our piece, let's see, here we go. Can you see these? Let's see. Hopefully you can see some of these images. So our piece really wanted to, it was mostly sort of a celebratory event, and we kind of wanted to take a different angle and really explore the racism of the white suffrage movement and the undervalued and unrecognized or underrecognized work of Black suffragists. So in Underbelly, women paraded down Michigan Avenue onto Ida B. Wells Barnett Boulevard, wearing suffrage sashes, bearing the names of white and Black suffragists on one side, and their achievements in the case of the Black women, often unheralded, and buried racist acts in the case of the white women on the other side. And we did 30-20, 30 Black women and 20 white women, kind of reversing the usual politics of representation in this memorializing of the suffrage movement. The sashes were then installed as a work as an installation piece in Hogan Art Gallery in Chicago. And it was really through that, let's see if I can stop sharing my screen. Where am I? I will stop this sharing. There we go. It was through that research that I kind of became fascinated with the relationship between Jane Addams, who is the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, who founds social work as a field, founds the settlement movement, basically the welfare system in the US, and Ida B. Wells Barnett, who launches this national anti-lynching campaign, is the founder of the suffrage movement, one of the founders of the suffrage movement and the club movement, Black women, and just enormously influential. And I thought they had a really complex relationship that was emblematic of the problems of how white suffragists exploited Black suffragists without renouncing racism and lynching. And they were just these two powerhouses in Chicago at the same time, working together and not. The more I learned about both of them, the more shocking the winning logic of white suffrage became to me, which really was this argument that you see in the play about temperance. And it's such, hopefully for us, it's almost incomprehensible what the logic was, but this was really the winning logic. This is why we have the 19th Amendment, that the drink causes, rapacity, specifically in Black men. And to protect white women, we need to give white women the vote so they can vote for temperance. And that logic was just so shocking. I shouldn't be shocked. If I'd been better educated earlier on in this, I would have understood this, but it was quite shocking to me to understand that it's not just that the white suffragists sort of reflected the racism of their time. I think that was the narrative in my head. No. They fomented and created this narrative and used it. So they were really active agents in creating and perpetuating this narrative. And then the fact that, Ida B. Wells Barnett goes in response in part to Jane Addams' editorial and goes and does a survey. And this is like pre-telephone, much less internet, right? Of what were the crimes that Black men were lynched for? Were they in fact for rape? No, they were for crimes of basically trying to exert their rights as citizens to own businesses and so on. So that was amazing to me. So that's really what motivated the play. And I felt it spoke to sort of the problems and tensions in the feminist movement now, as well as, the reiteration by not just Trump and the far right, but centrists and left at times as well, of this discourse about crime and criminality. So I wanted to sort of have it reverberate to the present moment in that way. I guess why do it as a play? Well, why ever make a play? I mean, plays are kind of weird and stupid, right? It's like this dead form. What's the point? It's just like middle-aged ladies with lipstick and funny hats, like live for this, but what's the point of a play? I don't know. Bertolt Brecht was a radical German theater innovator, and he had this idea that he abandoned. I always like the graveyard of dead ideas, right? Called the Lehrstück. I don't speak German. My French, as Melissa knows, is not great either, but my German is non-existent, so I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. The Lehrstück, it was the idea of this short, what he called it a teaching play at times and a learning play, which I prefer at other times, because I think I'm learning by doing this, that would basically often take a historical moment or event that we think we know and restage it, or restage its underbelly, the hidden part of something, and open, and really it would pose a question as opposed to be instructive. It would pose a question. And that's what, and that the audience would respond as we are doing today. This is like an ideal Lehrstück. And the playwright would revise the play with the conversation. So it's the dialectical idea of conversation and dialogue, competing truth claims, competing narratives, not being fully resolved, but rather staged. So that struck me as something I could do with this material. And I am not a Black woman. And I think there's something between appropriation and segregation and white supremacy that is the difficult terrain that artists who are not Black need to engage, need to operate, because there is not a space where you can talk about the feminist history or suffrage history that is not about race. So I also am very willing to be in this dangerous, fraught, dangerous, difficult territory. I think that's exactly where we need to be. And not embrace some fiction that we can or should disengage. At the same time, I wouldn't be the person to write the Ida B. Wells story. I was very conscious of like my deep identification with Ida B. Wells Barnett and my kind of disgust and disidentification of Jane Addams. And that was something I was sort of wrestling with in this. And earlier drafts, really, Jane Addams just, there's nothing redemptive or interesting about her. So she was a lesbian who lived with her partner, Smithy, who was one of the women who funded the whole enterprise. She carried around a life-size painting of Smithy whenever she traveled. And when she got the Nobel Prize, she thanked her wife, right? So, you know, she was an interesting figure of her own. And she was complicated, and at times she worked on the side of Black women and Black people's interests, and at times she was very politically savvy. She played both sides, is what I really, the more I learned about her. And I'm sure Marcia knows much more about this history, but one small example is later on, this is 1900, 1901, Chicago had not had a segregated school system. It was de facto segregated by neighborhood, but it wasn't officially segregated. Someone on the school board wanted to segregate it, right? Ida B. Wells Barnett goes to Jane Addams. Jane Addams goes to the wife of one of the school board members who was part of Hull House, funded Hull House, and says, no, I want to pressure you to not segregate the Chicago school system. So they were both power brokers in complex ways whose, the only other thing I want to say is something that was helpful to me, that I read tons of stuff I read theory, so I can read, feminist historians work on this, even though I'm not an historian. Read tons and tons of stuff. I read both their autobiographies. That gave me their voice, their wordsmithing, the way they sounded, the texture, and something about their characters as a way they wanted to represent themselves after their deaths to the world, right, in their biographies. So that was helpful. And then of all the stuff I read, some feminist historian, and I knew Marcia might know who, said something that was really powerful and useful to me. Said, just because the Black suffrage and white suffrage were going on at the same time does not mean they were integrationist movements, deeply segregated. And most of the white women were segregationists. And that was sort of like hard to sit with, but absolutely that language really helped me think about this in a productive way. So I'll stop there because I really want to hear, in the spirit of the Lehrstück, what both our experts have to say and what the chat and audience have to say. And I can talk more about dramatic choices and what they did when they filmed it because of COVID that I would have not done, or blah, blah, blah. But I want to turn it over. Thanks so much.
I wanted to just ask just a quick question that somebody asked in the chat. How long did it take to put the play together? Because I think we covered, and I'll ask the other question at the end.
So I banged out a draft very quickly, partly because I'm writing a screenplay of a much longer time span with a larger cast of characters, and I wanted like a nugget. And then Professor Christine Evans in Theater and Performance Studies came to me and said, "Oh, there's this play festival going on. Burning Coal is doing. I know you're doing this. Would you like to be a part of it? I can connect you and see if they're interested." So then I revised in like 2 days the work that would normally be. There's nothing like a deadline to focus you, right? So I got very focused and did a big revision. And then once it was commissioned and it was a yes, I did some more historical research and sort of tightened up both dramatically what I thought I wanted to convey and trying, though probably failing, to get the history a little more accurate.
Wonderful.
So pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly, clearly, like the short play format. Now I will turn to Professor Chatlin and ask her, your impressions of the play, if there's any comments you'd like to make or any highlights, and obviously considering your expertise as a historian, and particularly drawing from your book, Southside Girls, Growing Up in the Great Migration, which looks at the Great Migration through the eyes of Black girls in Chicago. And you're basically a specialist of Chicago. You're from Chicago. Could you give us an overview of what was happening in that time in Chicago, and particularly how Black feminists were mobilizing and organizing to advance both their anti-racist and feminist agenda?
Yes, so congratulations on your play, Professor Fink. I think something really powerful happened that we may have lost sight of because of COVID that I really want to amplify, and I see your work as part of it. So in the lead up to the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, I and other historians were in meetings about what this commemoration would look like. And what was amazing were the number of voices that said, we're not going to do the Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, Catherine Chapman Catt, we're not going to bring out the same cast of characters and suggest that this is a triumphant narrative. And what we see in this moment, in the kind of more balanced and very clear commemoration, is the outgrowth of what happens when we have access to the spaces in which those conversations can be had. And so I think that this is a really good example of what it means when we have people who take race and gender seriously, who are studying these periods of time, that the commemorations, it's not, the bicentennial in 1976, it's something that is tough, that is reflective, that is giving us kind of some signals about politics today. And so I've been really impressed with the kind of conversations about suffrage that have been possible to have in this space that I think 5 years ago or 10 years ago would have been completely different. So I think that this is a reminder about what does it mean when we really challenge some of the disciplinary and some of the structural spaces where ideas are generated. That's the first thing I want to say. And I'm so excited that this play was part of that. The second thing is, as I was watching it, I was thinking if, Jennifer, if you were also creating Jane Addams as an amalgamation of both Addams and Frances Willard of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, who the one thing I will say is that, if you read the autobiography of Ida B. Wells, and if you read anything about her over the course of her life, I have never encountered someone historically who wanted to document how pissed off she was with someone as it was unfolding. It's an amazing thing. She'll be talking about something in her in the biography, and then she'll say, and by the way, Miss Amanda Sears, this is my problem with you. And she makes it so clear. And when I was writing my own book, people know Wells as an anti-lynching activist, and increasingly we're understanding her as a suffragist, but she was also a child welfare advocate who understood what was at stake when Black children were abandoned or orphaned in Chicago. And this is this intersection that both Jane Addams and Ida B. Wells are at. They're in these places in which women are able to galvanize their power around family and community issues, settlement houses, old folks' homes, kindergartens, public parks. And so both of them are in a time where there's such clarity on their own part of their capacity, their intellect, their ability to do a number of things. They know that sexism, and in Wells's case, sexism and racism, is going to impede their ability to galvanize their power. And so they're using these various outlets, right, of women's work to do that. And it becomes so deceptive. And I think that the characterization of Jane Addams is spot on. She had a very clear sense of how to operate strategically and powerfully. And when she makes that note is, I'm an unmarried woman, this was very much, I think, the ways that Black women in public life and white women in public life, they were so connected by this deep irritation that patriarchy would not let them be great. And the circumstances in which they could enter public space were so different, because white privileged women like Jane Addams could be unmarried, they could have their Boston marriages, as it was so called, and they could still have a place. For Black women like Ida B. Wells to have a position as an authority figure and as a leader, she had to be married, she had to have children, she had to be able to kind of play these various roles in some really clear ways. So I think it's just a really excellent character study, because I think you really wrote these women how I would imagine them being, because there was a clarity in their strategy and a clarity in their purpose that they actually never obscured while they were playing that strategy. And so I think that was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Chatlin. Now I'd like to turn to Professor Norris. Same question, your impressions of the play, if there's any comments or highlights you have. But more specifically, I would like to ask you if you could give us an overview of the sort of a legal rights perspective, considering your expertise in constitutional rights, as well as women and gender rights. How did the 19th Amendment come to be ratified, and how it betrayed Black women, as we could clearly see, and particularly Black women in the South? And why do we need to wait another 50 years for the Voting Rights Act to pass in 1965? And also, if you could give us, as we know, it's far from being the only example or the only case where race and gender and sex have been pitted against each other. So if you could also give us other examples in sort of American legislations and struggles. Thank you. I know it's a three-part question.
But I just want to say thank you to the awesome play and the awesome playwright. It's a delight for me to have this kind of a thing, which is, it's an amendment to the Constitution. I teach about the Constitution, come to life in these just figures you hear about. I was a history major many, many years ago. And I've written about some of the history of race in the 20th century. And so what I really am delighted at is, as you know, I'll just echo Dr. Chatelain, which is that working in this space is so important, because it's not the only space, as Melissa asked me. For example, Margaret Sanger, who's a hero of the birth control movement, was also, I've written about eugenics, was a eugenist, and she allied herself with eugenists. So it's certainly not the only figure of this time. In fact, it is the story, in my view, of the entire 20th century, pretty much. That we are in this space now is a tribute to, Dr. Chatelain and others who have really, pushed, pulled, done what I did, paid my way through law school, did whatever we could. And so we're often, as white feminists, standing on the shoulders of Black women. And so I think it's really a great tribute to Ida B. Wells. It's also a great tribute to see the struggle, because these are struggles. In her own mind, Jane Addams probably believed that she was quite ahead of her time on the race issue, and she obviously was not. I particularly liked in the play that you allowed the characters to actually, and as someone who studies law, it's very divorced from humanity, it's very abstract. So one of the things I really enjoyed was that you could put into the characters, their interactions evoke this kind of uncomfortable conversation where one is interrupting the other, one is acting in a superior position to the other. Ida B. Wells is constantly interrupted. She's not called by her first name, not even her correct last name. All of the details I thought were wonderful ways of evoking the cultural aspect that fed their sense of the issues and how they enact that. So I might have to, screen this when I do the 19th Amendment for my students. I try to give them narrative because I think it puts them in a position where they have to imagine a different world. They don't know that temperance was, for example, the most important political issue in America and decided elections, including the presidency, for 50, maybe more. I mean, Dr. Chatelain will tell me if I'm getting the history wrong, but for a very, very long time. And they don't know that there were unholy alliances between Northern and Southern women for the purposes of gaining the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And this was using what was available to women at the time. That would be their defense, being a lawyer. I'm always thinking the other side. Their defense would be, well, that is all the power that I had. It barely made its ratification. And unfortunately, it shouldn't be valorized. Why? Because in the South, voting rights for African-American women did not exist for the rest of the century, pretty much even after 1965, when the Voting Rights Act passed. There still remain problems, and there still remain problems today, which is another reason why, although this takes us back in time, I was delighted that I was invited to talk today because I think it's important for people to see this isn't just a quaint historical moment that we've all arrived at. I think it is maybe in the past few years that we've been able to talk about this, and I applaud, Professor Fink for being in an uncomfortable space. When I wrote my book on eugenics and how crime is essentially racialized in the teens, 20s, and 30s, I felt in that uncomfortable space where I'm a white woman talking about race. But I think if we don't talk about it, we're just not being true to our history, and we can't really move forward, in my own opinion, even if it is an uncomfortable space. So we still have these problems today. The final point. Unfortunately, our Supreme Court, which I've been talking a lot about decided a case called Shelby County, and that case has brought back voter suppression in the South and in the North. I grew up near Boston. When I grew up, it was entirely segregated. So I don't think we should give the North a pass here. But we have voter suppression in the South. Ruth Bader Ginsburg predicted this. It is real. It has to change. I think it's mobilized a lot of young people, but it also is a very disturbing fact when those of us who care about the Supreme Court are thinking when we're voting today. I mean, this is a real live issue. And there are many facets of it. One has to do with disenfranchisement of felons. The stuff that's gone on. It's just, the playbook is so sad. I mean, the law says you can do X, right? But you don't get to do X because people put up all these social, cultural, or other barriers, so you can't vote. You have to recite the Declaration of Independence. You have to pay money. You have to do this. You have to walk 100 miles. The playbook is still out there. And so it will take all of us to continue, hopefully, fighting. The Congress is passing stuff right now, the House. We'll see if we can make some headway. Lots of people are committed to do it. But I think that young people should know the same playbook is going on now. Stacey Abrams is fighting very hard. She's a brilliant strategist. She's very well respected. Lots of people are working in the South, but it's a day-to-day effort. That's my sad news for today. But thank you for the play, and thank you for including me.
Thank you very much, Professor Norris. I mean, we have to
say one thing about temperance. I think is really important.
Oh,
one of the things that the play helps us understand is that these political compromises over suffrage were also about temperance, not only as it related to Black men, but there was also a concern among white women that that imbibing in alcohol on the part of white men made them more sexually licentious and made them more predatory. And so there's a conversation that is happening in the background, not only about alcohol, but about age of consent for sex. And these two movements are emerging at the same time because there is a sense on the part of white women that that their husbands and brothers and fathers are sexually exploiting and abusing Black domestic workers, but no one can say that. And so in the same ways that the abolition movement was really trying to avoid the issue of the sexual exploitation of enslaved Black women, something similarly is happening in trying to attack alcohol. And so this is why I think a lot of people are often confused that a lot of the white women who are willing to kind of exclude Black women from suffrage, a lot of them were abolitionists. And I think it reminds us that just because the goal was to end slavery doesn't mean that everyone had the same route to get there. And there were such divergent visions of what a slavery-free society would look like. And people were not in agreement about what equality would look like on the other side. And I think that contradiction and those tensions are something that this anniversary also helps us recall abolition from a different perspective.
Thank you very much, Professor Chatelain, for this edition, important one. We still have a few minutes. I would like to go back to Professor Fink and ask you a question from our audience, which is about the characters in the background and what they do in the context in the work and with the work in its entirety, which I think is someone that also, is relevant to talk about. And I'll go back to present questions.
Great. Well, it actually dovetails a little bit with what Professor Chatelain just said, which is sort of part of my discovery in this, researching this play as well, was temperance standing as proxy for what was unsayable about sexual abuse of women, right? Because to talk about sexual exploitation was to be unfeminine yourself, basically. So that whole temperance conversation has many facets to it. One explicitly racist, one explicitly a coding for this discussion of sexual abuse. So Sal, how does this connect to those background characters? And thank you to my good friend and amazing author who everyone should read, David Jackson, who raised this question in the chat. So I was interested in Sally, who creating a character who's a white working class woman, a servant, essentially, to Jane Addams, who is pregnant. And this was not portrayed fully in the scene. I don't think everyone got that. And in the larger narrative, it is due to a sexual assault. And Jane Addams, but Sally is disgusted to have to serve a Black woman. And Ida B. Wells Barnett does describe some scenes of this, and she was very good at calling out those who mistreated her, of white working class women, like not wanting to touch her hand when serving her and this kind of thing. And Jane Addams was on both sides of abortion and birth control in very complex and interesting ways. She did help some of the women in the settlement house get abortions. There's quite good documentary evidence of that. And the law was pretty vague. And then there's a movement to protect women by making abortion illegal. And she testifies for that law. So that, again, the sort of paradox of Jane Addams in that. Ida B. Wells Barnett parented 6 children, you could say 10 because she was a parent at the age of 16 of her siblings, including a girl with what was probably cerebral palsy. And she fought very hard to retain the family union. So she was in this parental role from age 16. She married a man. Her marriage was often talked about as sort of a model of equality, yes and no. His wife had died, so he brought to the marriage 2 children. They then had 4. That makes 6. I have 1, and I'm wearing a hat because I did not get to wash my hair today because I've been tearing my hair out being so busy as a working mom, times 6. And I've done minus 1,000 compared to Ida B. Wells Barnett. So I had this idea of the hat rack and the women with the hats and Sally being kind of a gospel choir slash Greek choir. And again, a little Brechtian commenting on, because these 2 women represented many, many other women. They had huge constituencies of women. So I wanted to play with that. I don't think we quite pulled it off in this round. It's a hard thing to pull off, but some sense of a collective. And the Hat Makers Union are the first union. Suffrage was not seen as a labor issue, as something that working class white women should concern themselves with. And Jane Addams actually makes that connection. It's one of the women who makes that connection with white working class union women. So I was drawing that in too. So that's the background a little bit. I don't think that was the most successful part of the play in this production, both not entirely due to them, due to me as well. But that's something that I'm working on, how to represent more fully the complexity of that.
And I have a follow-up question again about the play and actually about the coloring of the film. Someone asked, I was interested in how certain figures were colorized at different moments while the rest was monochrome.
Yeah, that wasn't my choice. That was the filmmakers and directors' choice. I had 2 things that I insisted on, and you're gonna laugh at the first because it's like, really, you had to insist on this? Oh yes, because of my experience with casting. I insisted that someone who self-identifies as a Black woman play Ida B. Wells Barnett. I asked for so little, but that I insisted on. And if they couldn't do that, they can't produce the play. And that's now written into the play's contract terms. So you cannot have a white woman playing that role. Sorry. And I know that sounds like, why would anyone do that? Oh, yes, they would. So that was one piece of it. And then I said, I want to think about, I've given equal weight, if any, and Ida B. Wells Barnett gets the last word. So I want to make sure the camera captures that, because I've had the experience before